Whether we want to talk about it or not, this topic, grief, is something that really should be talked about. So, we're going to be interviewing one of our authors in the book, Anatomy of Abundance. We're going to be talking about grief. It's a really hot topic, a really important topic, something that you definitely want to stick around for. Grief is something that we all know all too well, no matter whether it's a death, it's losing a friend, it's, just like friendships. It could be, anything from like losing a job. It's just so many different ways that grief shows up in our lives. Today, we're going to be talking to one of our experts, Karen Kramer, Dr. Karen Kramer. We're going to be talking about grief. She has a book out called Healthy Grief. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about Anatomy of Abundance, which is a book that she's participating in as one of our chapters. So Karen, first, before we get into like who you are and what you're all about, I want to know how you got into working with grief. Like, why is this a topic that you got into? Because it's not a topic that like everybody can totally embrace.
It's not. Thank you so much, Linda. And getting into grief has much to do with me understanding people within systems and systems within people, which is where I have played for over 30 years. So, when working with clients, especially over the last 5 years as a grief recovery expert, how I came into that was the type of clients that I started to work with. So, everything from women going through and after divorce to teenagers overcoming sexual molestation, or those who are grieving, those who have recent people who have passed away, even pets, and significantly grieving their loved ones who have passed, whether they are two-legged or four-legged. And when I looked back at those types of clients that I had, I realized that there was a theme. The theme was grief. Is how do we process through this loss that we have in our life, and more specifically understand how unresolved grief can settle in the body. So what I do with my book is not only understand grief, but also prevent it from settling in the body. And also, if it settles in the body, minor, major aches and pains to life-threatening diseases, that there are ways, it's not 100% proof, but there are ways to be able to help people overcome that and release it from their body.
Wow. Wow. It's a lot to process for sure. I know like my first experience I had a lot of experiences before this, but of death, was in seventh grade. And it was my grandfather passed away. Now, my grandfather lived in Texas and I lived in California. I only saw him once or twice a year, but I had this tremendous outpouring of like, I was just like burst into tears, and I didn't even really know him that well. So I'm not sure if I was grieving the loss of my grandfather, or grieving the loss of going to Texas, every year or something. Like, who knows, right? And so let's talk about that. How do we know what we're really feeling or what we're really grieving?
Good. And I'm going to start with the definition of grief. So if you were to Google the definition of grief, it'll say something along the lines of having a significant loss and a significant sorrow associated with that. I add to that is when what once was is no longer. So think of
Mm.
it kind of like a book with various different chapters in it, where in the chapter you're currently in, that grandfather was there, that relationship was there, that pet was there, that health was there, that work was there, the finances were there, whatever it was that you had. And then something happens, right? There's a significant loss that creates a significant sorrow within us. And what once is no longer. And we're transitioning into this new chapter of our life where we don't have that health, the finances, the person, the pet, the whatever it is. And we're transitioning, but it's not as easy as just flipping a page in a book and all of a sudden you're there. It's that transition phase. So to directly answer your question is, When we have some sort of loss and we're finding we're having some sort of emotion, like you did, Linda, when your grandfather passed away, whether it was your grandfather passing away or having to go to Texas, you're having an emotional reaction to that. My son at the age of 9 lost his father, and he's one of the stories that is in my book. There are 30 grief survivor stories that are in there from different survivors, but it's understanding the various different ways that people respond to different kinds of losses.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. I never thought about that. I like that what once was is no longer. I think that's a big thing to really unpack for ourselves and to see like what it is. How important is it for us to know what the grief is about in order to be able to heal through it?
Well, I would say it in my work, it's less about well, let me put it this way. When we have a response to grief, it is actually less about the loss. For example, whether it's a grandfather, whether it's a pet, whether that is, what it is grief is a response that we have to an event, a certain loss, that is based upon our past triggers, our traumas, and our limiting beliefs. So, for example, if I, at let's just say 5 years old, dad left mom, I felt abandoned, and I developed a belief that I am unlovable. Okay, so imagine that as a 5 year old. Now I'm in my 30s. I'm in a relationship. My marriage, and all of a sudden my husband decides that he's going to divorce me and leave. It's less about that fact that he's leaving, divorcing me, and more about that little girl, that little 5 year old girl that's feeling abandoned, that is feeling unloved, right? I go back to my past traumas and triggers, and that's my experience that I have around that loss. So, this experience that we have called grief has much more to do with those past traumas, triggers, and limiting beliefs.
Okay, so were you just telling my story or what? Because I ran away when I was 5. I was gone for a week, and
Mhm.
when I came home, I what I realized many, many years later is what had happened is nobody came to get me. My mom knew where I was, so she knew I was safe. I was just at the neighbor's house. So she knew I was safe, but this 5-year-old didn't know my mom knew where I was. And so what happened is I had that exact same thing you're talking about. I
Mhm.
had this thought like they didn't come to get me because they don't love me and they don't want me around. And
Yeah.
so now I'm married. I've been married now for 36 years, happily married, but still there's that pang inside of me sometimes when, we're having a disagreement about something and I'm like, he's going to leave me. So
Hmm.
exactly what you're talking about. So it shows up whenever that happens, I guess, right? That little
It
5-year-old is popping back in.
it does. It does. And no, Linda, I had no intention about the age and things. It's
It
always
just
funny
happened.
when
The
I
names
share
the
something.
names were changed to protect the innocent.
Yes. Yes. Like I have, for example, and related to that, if we're going to talk about 5, granted, as we're talking about the age of 5, there are beliefs and traumas and triggers that can happen at any time in our life. And those that occur under the age of 10 are those that are imprinted upon us in a way in our subconscious mind, in a way that we make beliefs about ourselves because we don't have this thing called a critical faculty. Without getting into too much jargon here, we are like children. You don't put them sit down in front of a shoot 'em up movie, right? You don't put them in front of pornography. You don't put them in front of a lot of things because they don't have the filters that we as adults do to know that that's not real, that's not right, etc. So under the age of 10, they're like sponges and they take everything in. Well, also under the age of 10, we create these beliefs about ourselves and the world, which as an adult, we may say that doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem logical that mom didn't know it wasn't going to come to save me because she knew I was at the neighbor's or something along those lines, right? In that logical adult mind. But as a kid, nobody's coming to save me, or I'm unlovable, or whatever it is for us.
Yeah.
So that's why some of those things that we experience at a younger age may start to bubble up in this experience called grief in a way that we don't even know. We don't even know.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. Yeah, there's, oh my gosh, it's just so much to this whole grief thing. I have a myriad of scenarios that are just running through my head right now, things that for me to look at. So we're talking about, we have two different books we're talking about. Today, we want to kind of focus on Anatomy of Abundance. This is one of our recently published books. You can go get your copy at go.patrinawisdom.com/abundance. That's go.patrinawisdom.com/abundance. So why don't you talk a little bit about your chapter in this book, which is, let me pull this down. The title of your chapter is Love, Money, and Happiness: Cultivating Abundance Through Interdependent Thinking. So why don't you share with us just a little bit about your chapter, just a snippet so people can see why they need to go get this book.
Yes. Well, when I was invited to be part of this book by Patrina, I was in the process of writing Healthy Grief. And at first I was trying to fit in all the structure into this book, and I realized it wasn't fitting for me. So I threw it out and within 2 days rewrote the chapter. And what I did is I brought grief into the chapter. And what I mean by that is when we look at abundance. So let me step back and say that there are a lot of books, this being one of them, a lot of podcasts, a lot of seminars that are out there that are focused on how to win, how to gain, how to acquire. There's less that is out there on how to lose, let go, and grieve. So what I wanted with this chapter in a book on abundance was to acknowledge what we needed to let go of, or that process of how to let go of some of the things that didn't serve us as we stepped into this world of abundance, whether it was in love, whether it was in money, whether it was in happiness. So, for example, just based on some of the things we've talked about, Linda, is if I'm focusing on love, for example, and some of these feelings start to bubble up about I'm unlovable, or I've been abandoned, or I'm not enough, whatever they are, that to acknowledge what some of those beliefs or past experiences and traumas are, that we may need to release to be able to fully step into the world of abundance, whether it is in love, whether it's financial, whether it's in happiness. So that's what this chapter is about, is to understand, where do I want to go? What do I need to release? And how can I do that in the process of moving to what I want?
Wow, this is so great because I myself started a personal development journey only 9 years ago. And, it's like later in life I started it. And it got to the point where I was recognizing that I felt like if I wasn't positive 100% of the time, that there was something wrong, because I kind of like did the full swing because I was always negative and now I was like always positive. And so I can't show my negative sides because then people will think there's something wrong because I'm not being positive all the time. And it is interesting because that actually did show true in like one time I did a post about something that was not all, butterflies and kittens and all that stuff. And somebody reached out to me, "Are you okay?" So it's interesting because I made the full swing over to the other side. And so now I'm kind of like the pendulum swinging back to like, let me get to a normal state where, I'm positive most of the time, but realizing that it's okay to have feelings or thoughts that are not always positive, I guess. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because maybe I'm completely off. I don't know.
No, you're not. You're not completely off. And I know we're focusing on abundance here, and I'm gonna cross over. So part of the subtitle to Healthy Grief, my book, is on normalizing and navigating loss in a culture of toxic positivity. So that's the subtitle. And people
Okay,
usually
before
ask,
you go there, wait, what is toxic positivity?
I was just going to say that because
Okay,
that's
cool.
where we're going there, Linda, is what is it? So when we think about positivity, it is, it can be the rainbows and the kittens. However, we're real people with real lives. And when we're vulnerable, especially on social media, as you were talking about, it allows us to connect with people. But just like I heard you say, is if you're happy and cheerful all the time, and then people see another side of you, it actually breaks the pattern. So yes, they may reach out to you and say if you're okay, but it also catches their attention. So there's a positive side to that. But let's talk about toxic positivity here for a bit. Toxic positivity is around that when it's something that hinders the natural healing process. So it may be something where, all good intended, Linda, you're going through some form of grief, and I feel uncomfortable with you not being happy. So I may say something with all great intention to make you happy or to cheer you up. But in the process of that, I also may say something that also may downplay the fact that you're going through something. So, for example, I had a gentleman who had, well, the most extreme case, gentleman who unfortunately lost his son to suicide. And somebody said to him a good week after that, your son is in a better place. Now,
Mhm.
that may have been with all great intentions. Then that person may have tried to say that to really make this person who was grieving the loss of his son better. But what happened was it wasn't acknowledging that griever and the feelings that they were going through at that time. So there's many other situations, but one is somebody trying to make a griever feel better. The other is toxic positivity when you're the griever. So if I'm the griever and I feel like I've gone through this divorce, for example, or I've lost somebody, but I have to show up at the holiday dinner table or in some kind of conversation with friends, and I have to put on that smiley face because I don't want to let them down, or I don't want to, I don't want to cry
Yeah.
in front of everybody. So I have to put on the smiley face. So whether it is within us or external to us, it is something that tries to elevate and bring up in a more positive atmosphere, but in the process, it hinders that natural healing process, because all a griever wants is to be seen, heard, and understood. Both ourselves, when we see, hear, and understand ourselves, it gives us an opportunity to heal. When we're seen and understood and felt by somebody else, it gives us the opportunity to heal with somebody else.
Hmm. Wow, that reminded me of I had somebody in my life recently who said to me, don't share because I do a lot of social media. Don't share the crap or the storm while you're in it. Like wait until you've gone through it to share it. And I don't know. I feel like that's probably not great advice because I am
I
on social media all the time. It's like that's where I live my life.
I will share something that happened, and actually it was literally two years ago at the time we're doing this recording. So I lost my brother and my mother 2 weeks apart. Um, and during that time, because being a grief recovery expert, I chose to do Facebook Lives, and I shared the process, and I was very raw. I was real. I
Mhm.
opened up, I broke down crying. And so there's a caveat there. So, two things. One is I had a lot of people who followed me. In fact, I didn't realize until a couple months ago that somebody asked me, how did you get so many followers on your personal page? I have more people following me on my personal page than I do on my fan page, because that's where I was sharing. And I realized that this is where I ended up with more followers. So I want people to know that when you are vulnerable and you're real, people are going to connect with you. And there's a caveat to that. I did not just get on and say, here's all that's happening to me. What I did is I was intentional, and I said, I shared vulnerably. And with every live I did, I left people with at least one, if not more than that, learning or lesson about what I was doing. This wasn't, again, just verbal vomit and verbal emotionally vomiting out there. I truly was on to share my process vulnerably and have people walk away with at least one or more learnings about it.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's that important piece there because that's for yourself as well as for them. Is that
Mm-hmm.
you're like, what am I learning through this situation? That's one thing I like to ask myself now. Like when I'm in, I call it the storm. When I'm in the storm, is like, what am I learning right now? Because in the past, I would not learn anything, and then in the most recent past, I would look back and I would say, what did I learn? But now I'm learning to like recognize that I'm in it, and I can say, what am I learning? So it's like I'm just edging myself up so that it helps me to get through this situation a lot faster too when I do like what am I learning in this situation right now. So we are talking about the book Anatomy of Abundance. Again, you can go get your copy at go.patrinawisdom.com/abundance. So excited to have you in this book, and then also your book, Healthy Grief: Normalizing and Navigating Loss in a Culture of Toxic positivity. You can get that book at bit.ly/healthy-grief. And that's capital H and capital G. I did not type it with a capital H and capital G, and it didn't work. So make sure that that is case sensitive. Again, that's bit.ly/healthy-grief. Go get your copy of both books. So Karen, oh gosh, we're winding up. I can't believe this is time is already up here. But why don't you share with us, like, what is something you would like people to take away from reading the book, The Anatomy of Abundance?
I would like them to understand when it comes to the concept of grief, that it is more than just death and dying. It is in everyday losses. So even when it comes to stepping into the world of abundance, it's not that you can just step into it and not be aware of what is underneath that. Because once you step into that, for example, you're stepping into that relationship, if you're not dealing with the traumas, triggers, and limiting beliefs that are underneath that, I happen to tell you, you're going to sabotage any good plans that are out there. You really need to deal with what's underneath. Otherwise, even stepping into that abundance, into that happiness, into that love, you're not going to sustain it. So
thank you for sharing. Yeah, definitely. Deal with your grief, make it healthy. You can also connect with Dr. Karen at drkarenkramer.com. And thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate everything you're doing to help people through these different types of situations that we have, different grief scenarios, like you mentioned, and just to help us to, help them to get through it, in their time. I was going to say faster, but that's not the key. The key is not getting through it faster. The key is getting through it in their time. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen. Truly appreciate you.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate you too.
One of the things that I've personally found from my experience of working with Action Taken Publishing is that I've walked away with more friends than I had before, because of the relationship that you build with the authors while working in an anthology. I think it's an amazing project to be able to get published. It's a fantastic way to get published the first time, and I've almost seen people who get hooked on doing anthologies, because once that bug is bitten, you feel like you can release more and more and more and more stories, and Linda's got a bunch of titles that I think resonates with a lot of us who live in the real world.